Hey guys, welcome to a Red Line Talk Show. I'm here today with Iliana and our very special guest. It's Lou Foundos. Welcome to the show.
Welcome,
He's
Lou.
a longtime businessman and philanthropist, community leader. We're very glad to have you on the show today. How are you, Lou?
I'm good. It was originally Lou Fundo.
Lou Fundo. Okay.
And it was changed by the Greeks, and we'll go through
Yes.
So Lou, glad to have you here. Tell us a little bit about. I know you were born in Albania, from Korçë. Walk us through a little bit of your history.
Sure. So there's a plaque in Korçë that says September 9th, and in Albanian, I have a copy of it because I took it. It says, on this day, 39 people were killed and 102 were wounded by the Germans as they left Albania. And by tradition, Orthodox tradition, 40 days you take the child to church. They call it churching for the first time. So that was about 40 days for me. So it's an excuse for a party. So you get all the relatives together. My uncle, my mother's brother, was supposed to come. He went to the wrong relative, and he went to the square like all the young people did to celebrate. Well, unfortunately, he was one of the 39 that was killed. And my mother went into some deep depression, and my father was pretty comfortable. So the doctor said, have a change of scenery, go to Greece. So we went there on Christmas Day because my sister remembers, she was 12. She's 12 years older. She remembers we were in Florina and the bells were ringing and everyone was celebrating Christmas. And then we ended up in Thessaloniki where we had some relatives. And we stayed there a month, and his partners, he had his American Express card. I mean, the money belt in the old days.
Yeah.
So he had enough money for 3 to 6 months. And the partners said to him, it's a little unsteady here. Stay another couple of weeks. By the third month, the border had been closed, and we were refugees because he had not taken all this money that he had.
So you just missed the border closing and
Just-
being in Albania during
Yep.
the communist time.
And my grandmother was still in Albania, and she wanted my sister to stay with her to take care of the property and the house. And my father said, it's wartime. I'm not going to separate the family. You can come with us or you can stay. She decided to stay, which was the worst decision. They took over the house. They threw her out. They took over the next house. They threw her out. So she struggled until she survived. So we're in Greece, and now my father makes a deal with one of the relatives that we have a bedroom and we have the kitchen. They have the living room and another bedroom. And I don't know how he's paying for all this.
Yeah.
And then 47 came, and there was a Sephardic Jew that used to come from Kasria, Greece, to Bilish, where my father had a store, and buy stuff from him. And in the wintertime, sometimes the paths would get blocked with snow, and Mr. Mayor would get stuck, and my father would let him sleep on the couch. What do? You have coffee, you talk. They became friends.
Yeah.
His son came to America, became a multimillionaire in the garment district.
Oh,
Oh,
very
wow.
nice.
And he would write to my father and said, come to America, I'll show you around, we'll have a great time. My father says, I have everything I need here. And then the war came, 39, 40. So communication broke. And 47, he found his address on Riverside Drive and said, Mr. Mayor, if you ever meant what you said, Europe is devastated. Greece is in the middle of a civil war. There's no future for my family. This is when I need help. Now, my father had a brother and 2 sisters here, but they're working people. So this guy arranged for 5 visas from Southern Europe, put up a $100,000 bond to get us to America. Why? Because one human being had been good to the other human being.
Wow. And when you came to America, you were about 5 years old?
5 years old.
And I remember we landed at the only airport, LaGuardia International Airport. And I remember the BOAC hangar. And we arrived on British Airways. And they pull up the gangplank to us walk down, no security. Must be 40 relatives running towards the plane. And I'm petrified because I think we're being attacked. So I'm holding my mother's hand and I'm saying, what's happening? They're going to kill us. She says, no, they're our relatives. But they're all running towards us. These are things that stay in your mind forever.
Right.
And so that was the first introduction to Albania, to America. And then we got separated into different relatives because no one had big apartments.
At that time, yeah.
So it took about 4 or 5 months for us to get our own apartment.
So where did you end up staying when you first came to America?
Well,
In which
I was
area?
with my aunt and my parents because I was the youngest in Washington Heights. My sister went with another relative. My brother went with another relative.
Oh, wow.
And then we arranged, in 4 months, we had our own apartment in the Bronx.
Okay.
And that became home base. And,
So you grew up in the Bronx?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I grew up in the Bronx. And you come here and the kids are speaking another language. So how are you going to play ball? So you learn the language very quickly.
Yeah.
My brother was 8 years older. My sister was 12 years old. They're studying the books and the dictionary because they got to start school. So my sister tells a story. She says, you're sitting in the corner playing with your truck, and you look up at us and you say, what are you wasting your time? Just ask me any word. I know everything. and that was the beginning of starting school in America. And Bronx became home. And, my father at 14, his father died, and he had to run the business. And he always wanted to stay in school. So he would always tell us, you have to stay in school. I had no opportunity, but you have to. And he kind of drummed it into us. So we always did well in school. And when it came time to go to high school, I saw there was an exam for Bronx Science, which gave you the day off. And I said, that's no brainer. So I took the exam, not thinking.
And that's a
I'm
very
gonna get
specialized
in.
school.
Yeah, not thinking I'd ever get in. And then I got the notice that you're accepted. So I said, well.
And that was your start to get from there to Harvard.
So I went to Bronx Science, and then I wanted to be an engineer. So I sent, parents couldn't help you filling this stuff out. They weren't educated.
Right.
They didn't know the language. So you have to do everything yourself. So I started looking at schools, and I found Rensselaer Polytechnical, RPI, was one of the best engineering schools. So I sent away for an application. I'm filling it all out. I'm doing everything right. I get to the last line, $2,000 tuitions. Who has $2,000? Who's kidding who? So I ended up going to City College for free in those days, just books and bursars fees, etc. And it was an excellent engineering school, very tough because these guys never made anything easy. They had tenure, and they could break your chops about anything. So I graduated as an engineer, electrical engineer, and I was convinced I was going to work for a year to make money for the first time in my life, real money. And everyone's saying, well, have you thought about a graduate degree? I said, yeah, I'm going to get a graduate degree in engineering. They said, have you ever thought about an MBA? I said, what's an MBA? I said, Masters in Business. I said, family's always been in business, but I don't know what this is. And so I did my homework, and I found the 10 best schools, and I had good grades. So I knew I'd get into one of them. And I got a fellowship to Stanford. It was California. So it's a little complicated. And then it's Friday, and I get the letter from Harvard. It says you've been accepted, and I'm checking the postmark. I'm checking the seal. And I said, my friends went to a lot of trouble to fool me. They did this, and I'm going to kill them. So Monday I called the school up. I said, I just want to confirm. Oh, yes, Mr. Foundos, you're on our list. You've been accepted. Now I had just started work. I was working for 6-7 months, making some real money for the first time in my life. And
how much money were you making back then, though?
I was making $700 a month. The average salary.
Typical Albanian question. How much you make?
The typical.
That was a lot of money back then.
Yeah. No, the typical guy got out of school with $500, $550.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of money. Not only that, but what does every young man want first? A car.
Car, yeah.
What car did you get?
What was your first car?
So I said, I want to buy a car. My father and my brother say, listen, get a used car, Chevy, for a couple of years and buy a new car. No, I want a new car.
Did you get a BMW?
No, I got
Mercedes.
No, a GTO, Pontiac GTO, 1966.
I love Pontiac.
It had like 400 horsepower. Like, who needed 400? So this was my baby. And
what color was it?
gray, metallic gray.
Nice.
And then 6 months later, I get accepted. Now, I'm living on bread and water to pay for this car. I paid for it in 6 months. So now what am I going to do? So I go to Harvard, and I've got a few $1,000s, and I run out of money after 6 months. Like most Albanians, we don't know how to borrow money. We've never borrowed money. So now I have to go to the loan officer and ask for a loan. Mrs. Glenn, my hand is shaking as I'm signing this paper for $1,000. And she says, do you have any assets? I said, Miss Glenn, I wouldn't be here if I have an asset. She says, do you have a car? I said, that's not my asset. That's my baby. She says, well, she winked. She says, we're going to have to get rid of that at some point.
Oh, no. Did you really?
Yeah. So
you know how much that would be worth right now?
Over $100,000. So I put a price that she knew was high for about 3-4 months. It's time. You got to get rid of it.
No.
So this Air Force captain comes, and I'm crying as I give him the keys.
Please tell me you went and you found it and you rebought it.
No. Who had money to do these things?
I mean.
You should buy it now.
I wish. It's over $100,000. I've looked on it. And so, that's how life develops. And then I'm graduating, and everyone's taking trips. And, we were always focused on making money and getting. So the hell with this. I'm going to be working the rest of my life. But I have no money, so I got to go back to Mrs. Glenn. Mrs. Glenn, I need a few $1,000s. What for, Lou? I said, I live in New York City. I got to put security in an apartment. I'm living with my parents. Got to put security down in an apartment. I've got to pay rent. She said, oh, okay, I understand. I'll give you the check. So I went to the travel agent, bought a ticket to Europe. I couldn't find anyone to go with me because it was too late.
What year is this?
68. And it was the first time my parents went back to Europe since we left, and they had a reunion in Greece. So I traveled by myself for about 3 weeks. And it's amazing who you'll speak to when you're traveling alone. Little old ladies, other students, military.
Is there someone who stood out to you to this day from that?
No, it was just a lot of fun people that you met along the way. And then we ended up in Greece, where there was my father had a sister there, and one sister flew in from Australia, the other one from the States. So they had a family reunion. And we go to dinner one night somewhere on the coast, and must be 40 relatives there. What do you think happens? All the men on one side, all the women on the other side.
Always.
So we had a real family reunion, and it was nice meeting some of the cousins. Some had been in Greece since the 30s. And there was an uncle, Judge Evangeli, who left probably 1930. And he had a store in Thessaloniki. He was successful. When I met him, Judge Evangeli was probably 82, 83. And he was doing a family history. And he had gotten the family tree back to 1745 in Voskopoje. That's where the family was.
Very nice.
So now you got to remember, he was born probably 1860, so he could talk to people that were born in 1800, and he was always taking notes. How many sisters, brothers, and this type of thing. So he made this family tree in the genealogy. He died at 102. So he kept on working on this thing, and his son Michali finally published it and sent it to everyone. I had to get it translated from Greek to English. And that's the basis of the start of the family history that I've decided. My grandchildren don't understand any of this right now. So I figured I'd write something for them, so when they finally wake up and want to know where they're from.
That's very good.
They'll have something.
And now they have this show they can refer back to as well for
Correct.
some of it.
Actually, I had this also urge to find out my family tree. And I went as far as back as my family's originally from Gjirokastër, Libohova. But that's as far as I go after that, But it's very important that what you're doing, because eventually the grandkids, they're probably gonna start wondering, where am I coming from?
For sure. I took them to Albania last year, and they may go back again 2 years ago. They may go back this year. I was talking to my son. He said, maybe we'll go to Greece for a while and spend a little time. And I said, just tell me.
Yeah. Our family, both mother's side, father's side, are from Dibramada, and I always thought that we were always 100%. But when you go back for the Silla last name, it traces back to the late 1800s, actually originating from Shkodër. And basically, Osman Sela from Shkodër had 3 sons, and during that time of war had to split up. One went to Struga, one went to Dibër, one went to Lish, and that's
Very
basically how the
practical
family...
people. They did what they had to do.
Yeah, to survive.
And it was, Voskopoje was the commercial capital for that area. Next to Istanbul, it was the next largest commercial center. And if you've ever been there, it's up in the hills. It's very well protected. And I think there was like 24 churches, the first university, first printing press in the region. So needless to say, the Greeks claimed it. But so they have another name from Voskopoje. And the Turks burned it down a couple of times. The last time, I think, was the 1870s. And that's when the migration went to Korçë.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Lou, you started out living in Bronx.
Right.
And we just learned about your whole history. Now, can you walk us through your real estate investments and how you bought your first property and now you have multiple buildings and really focusing a lot in real estate?
It really started when I was 28, working with my MBA in electrical engineering in an instrument company. And Monsanto had spent $20 million developing all this stuff, and there was a recession in 71, so they decided to close the factory. And the general manager that had hired me was a very bright, he was a technical genius, and he said to me, "Do you want a job? I've got a job for you in Long Island." So I said, "Yeah, if I work for you, because I think you're a smart guy, I can learn something." So he interviews me, gets me the job, calls me a week later and says they're closing everything up, they're moving everything to California. "Do you want to go?" I said, "No, I want to work for you." I said, "I'd have no trouble getting a job." So he calls me a week later, he says, "You want to buy a company?" I said, "Fred, I owe Harvard $10,000. I don't have a pot to pee in. What do you mean buy a company?" He says, "Can you write the business plan?" I said, "Yeah, I can do that." So I said, "I have to get a job. I got to pay the rent." So I got a sales job, and now we write this, and we're doing presentations. And what keeps you going is one person has to say yes. And after 50, 60 rejections, one guy said yes. So now we had the money to buy it, and my share of equity was $15,000. It could as well been $50,000 because who had money?
Right.
So I figured my brother was good for 2 or 3, maybe my father for a couple. So I sat down with my dad and I said, "Listen, Dad, I got this opportunity." And his net worth at that point was $35,000 to $40,000. That's my guess. And he listened and he listened. He says, "I'll give you the $15,000. I said, "No, I can't take it from you. It's half your savings almost." "No," he says, "I have faith in you. You know at that point you're going to pay him back no matter what it takes." So he gave me the money for my equity share. And then I stayed with that company for about 7, 8 years. And my partners were much older. So I was looking for a big payday. They were looking for an annuity. So our goals were not exactly the same. Yeah. And twice we had offers to sell and they said no. And I said, "That's it." So I called Al, who was in Paris on a sales meeting. And I said, "When you come back," he always called me and said, "Let's do something together." And I said, "No, because you're an older brother. You're always going to tell me what to do. This is how it is." So I was frustrated. And I called him and I said, "I'll work with you for 1 year. If we can make it work, the families get along, the wives get along. I don't want to ruin anything." So we worked for a year. And his forte was sales. Mine was financing the factory. So I ran that end of it. He ran sales and worked for 20 years. So after we sold the second company, I took some time off. I said to my wife, "I want one employee. I don't want all the headaches of all employees. I'm going to have one secretary and that's it." And this Albanian young man that I had coached in basketball calls me up. He says, "Harlem is really developing. There's some properties there cheap. You want to do something?" I said, "Let me look at it." He says, "We'll do the construction and we'll take a piece of the equity." I said, "I'll arrange all the financing and everything." So the first building we bought was right very close to Columbia University. And the strangest thing happened. We were getting students that were living there with no hot water because we hadn't gotten this final sign-off. And they would go to the gym and take showers and go to classes. And I found the number of a guy in Con Ed, one of the supervisors. I call him 6 a.m. He says, "How the hell did you ever get this number?" I said, "Well, I don't know, a friend of mine had it." And I told him the situation. September 10th, 2001, they turn on the gas in that building, and September 11th happens. We wouldn't have had gas in that building for over a year.
Wow.
Wow.
So, Kismet.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was real luck. So that was the first project. So then we did about 10 gut renovations. In those days, it's very difficult to imagine. Harlem was 40% boarded up. Nobody living there. These were after the riots. The buildings were just abandoned. So when you bought something, it was a shell. Once the roof goes and everything gets wet, so you buy 2 brick walls and the staircase. And that's it. And so then you have to do the whole project. And I made relationships with banks so I could arrange the financing, construction loans. And we did that about 10 times. And then everyone started going to Harlem. Then the prices went crazy.
Yeah.
So I decided that we would shift some of the assets to the Bronx. And I'm meeting with this chifuta about buying this one building. And he's got his yarmulke on and he's yelling at the broker and he says, tell him about 2330 Ryer Avenue. He said, why does that address sound familiar? That's the first building we ever moved into.
Wow. Talk
Oh,
about
okay.
full circle.
1 million properties in New York City. So it's one chance in a million. So I looked at it. It was an okay deal, not the greatest. So I had lunch with Harry Bektari. And I said, Harry, I got this. Oh, he says, you got to buy it. He says, I lost my building where we came to America. You have to buy it. I said, you really think so? He says, believe me, you'll appreciate it later on. So on Harry's advice, we bought the building. It's been a good investment. And I asked my sister, where did we live exactly? She said, on the first floor, all the way back, left side apartment. So before we bought the building, I said, I want to see 3 apartments. I picked that was one of them. And I walked in there. It was like going back in history. There was 1 bedroom to the left, the living room, and the kitchen table where we always had dinner and my mother would cook. And everything came back. And my brother and I slept on the couch in the living room. My sister slept with my parents. And that was the first apartment we had.
What an amazing story.
Yeah.
And it was unbelievable because it all came back completely those years. And I was a little kid, so... But so we bought that building and several others. And,
Do you still have that building today?
Yeah, we do.
Very nice.
Do you have that apartment?
No, I know
Little
who lives
museum.
there. So, and then we bought several other buildings in the Bronx. And
So tell us a little bit now. I mean, that's since you've been in real estate for so long, right? Today's real estate industry, I think it's a little bit overpriced. What is your take on that, on today's
in the
market?
Bronx, it's a little underpriced. It got overpriced about 4 or 5 years ago because the interest rates were so low. But now when the interest rates got to 7, the properties probably took a 30% hit. Now as interest rate is dropping, they'll go up again. But depending, like private homes have gone crazy.
Yeah.
Because there's no supply. And people that have
But
money.
what's driving the price? I'm still confused when it comes to real estate, right? Because I feel like the salaries haven't changed, haven't moved up much, right, throughout the years. But for some reason, real estate keeps going up 10, 20% each year.
That's only the last few years. Typically, we
Right.
go up 3 or 4%. It's supply and demand. It's a very simple economic theory. It's nothing.
But who's buying this?
There's always
buildings?
people that have money. And I'll give you a perfect example. The house across the street from me, this couple lived there when they bought it originally. So it was probably 40, 50 years old. They had an autistic child, and he took care of the parents. The mother died and the father, then he lived there, and then he passed away. They had not done anything in 50 years, nothing. So the family comes from Ohio, hires a broker, and says, what do you think it's worth? They said, this is going to be a gut renovation. Let's price it at $990, knowing people have to put money. It's a very nice neighborhood. So they put on the market for $990. In 4 days, it sold.
Over
There's
$1 million.
bidding war. It goes for 1,248.
Wow.
Lunacy. A Chinese family buys it.
I was going to ask you, was that
Very
a Chinese
Very,
fan?
very nice lady comes with a bottle of wine, says, we're going to be your neighbors. They have workers. The only thing that was left was the shell. I don't know how much money they put into it. They had 2 cute little kids. And I don't know what the guy does, but obviously he had the cash to probably pay all cash. You can't compete with that.
I was gonna ask you. So we live in Staten Island, and actually I did real estate for a little bit as well. And I remember very distinctly that we had a lot of Asian buyers at the time, just buying up in cash.
Yeah.
And they're still buying today in heavy numbers. I don't understand how or where this is money coming from, but I feel like there's a huge demand, right, for housing.
There's no supply.
And
listen, when people have mortgages at 3%, and now it's 7%, and they want to sell the house, they're going to give up the 3% mortgage and have a 7% mortgage and probably pay another $2,000 a month in mortgage, maybe $3,000. So they almost can't afford to leave.
Right.
And a lot of these people would be retirees, would be moving south. But the interest rate's the same all over the country.
yeah,
So they get stuck in the house, so there's no supply. And so the lady next door to us that had Alzheimer's, husband passed away a few years ago. She passed away last week. This is another house that's going to have to be totally redone. I don't even want to think what it's going to sell for. There's a group of people that have the money. Usually they're entrepreneurs or in finance, or there's family money involved. And when one of these houses comes up, if they want to be in that neighborhood, it's very, very difficult to compete with them. Unless either it's an all-cash deal or you're willing to pay the 7% mortgage. And that's the dilemma right now. It's supply and demand. And until they build more, or the interest rates get down to about 4.5%, where people are willing to pay a little more but move from their mortgage, their houses, it's a frozen situation. And in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like this.
But so in your view though, where do you see this real estate prices going? Are they going to keep going higher and higher, or are they going to at some point hit the ceiling and just stay there?
When the interest rates get down to 4.5 to 5, they're going to level out. If you buy a house today, like this couple bought, that price is probably going to stay the same 5-7 years. It's not going to go up.
It's just the interest is going to go up or down.
As the supply increases, prices will stabilize, and these people are overpaying right now. But to them, it's not an investment; it's a house.
Right.
So they're willing to do that.
Do you recommend right now people to buy a home, or is it?
I would wait until the interest rates get around 5.
Okay.
So it becomes a little more manageable. Now, put things in perspective. My brother bought his first house, and he had a 5% mortgage in the 60s. We had the business in New Jersey. We moved here in 1980. The prime interest rate was 17%.
Oh, wow.
I remember my mom, too, in the 80s. It was like 14% at the time.
So I was able to get a mortgage at 14% because we had a good amount of money with Chase, and I twisted their arm. And I thought I got a bargain.
Yeah.
And then over the years, every 2 years, we refinance 11, 9. So high interest rates were around for a long time until 2008.
Yeah, in 2005, when I got my first house, the interest rate was 10%.
Yeah, it was not unusual.
But at that time, it was like it was either you got your hold of a house and you paid 10%, or you waited, but then you weren't guaranteed to get a house later on when the interest rate went down.
Yeah, so,
but then after that, when the whole market crashed, it was easier then to refinance to a lower interest rate at that time.
Yeah,
for the 30-year or the 20-year.
A good job, you could always refinance every couple of years. But we're caught in a very unusual situation where there's very little supply and high demand. So until the interest rates drop and things stabilize a little bit,
Right.
there's no good answer to this. It's just a difficult situation.
I want to switch back a little bit to Albania. So you began investing there in the 90s, right?
Yes.
Which Albania at the time was going through transition from communism. What drove you to go to Albania during that time and start investing there?
You know, when my father died in 77, he left a will. He didn't believe in copy machines, so he wrote 3 originals for the 3 kids.
Oh, very nice.
And part of the will said, you own these properties in Albania. This far from the post office, this in Bilish. And with my brother and sister, we laughed and said, maybe our grandkids will. Communism was going to collapse then. And 12 years later, communism collapsed. And we got the wills out and said, you know what, maybe we should see if we can find them. So I think the first time my brother went back was probably 91. I went back, I think it was 92 or beginning 93. And we found where all the properties were. And in those days, maybe I shouldn't say it, but the bribes were cheap.
Yeah.
So you could...
Back then it wasn't bribes, it was just the way of life.
It was a tip. It was a tip.
Yeah. It was a tip.
Yeah.
So, you know, for $100 to the guy in the real estate office, he was thrilled because he was getting $200.
That's a lot of money, yeah.
So, and Nico, the Albanian fellow that worked with us and was related to Al's wife's family, he was very good. He was like the mayor of Korçë, and he knew everyone. So through him, we were able to get the 3 or 4 properties back. And one of them was right behind the Grand Hotel. And this had been office buildings, and my father paid an Italian architect to design this house with central heating. This was 1939.
Wow.
So
Very nice.
we were supposed to move there, but he was a businessman. He says, you know what, I can rent that for a lot. We'll live in the old house for a while. And then the war came. So when we got there, the communists had not put one nail in this stupid building and never fixed anything for 45 years. It was a disaster. And every time we'd go to Korçë, we'd have to stay with a relative. And no hot water, no heat, the usual problems in the 90s.
Yeah.
And we would stay in a nice family hotel in Tirana. So I said to Al one day, you know, why don't we take Pop's property and build a small hotel there so at least we have a place to go. So we got an architect. We drew up the plans. It was 18 rooms. 2 of them were suites. And so then I went to school with the son of the guy who started the Holiday Inns. So I called Spence up and I said, Spence, I don't want you to laugh at me. This is not 200 rooms. This is 20 rooms. But I need furniture. I need stuff and stuff. So he laughed and he says, okay, I'll send you the right stuff. If you want, I'll send you a guy that'll build a hotel and everything. I said, no, the Albanians can do that. They can do that cheap, but I need some help in these areas. So we bought everything in the States. We shipped everything over. It was March 97, and Albania's blowing up.
Oh, that was during the Civil War.
Right. So Korçë was very quiet. All the rooms were outfitted. The TVs were there, the furniture. The lobby area still needed work. So it looked like it was unfinished. So we were there to open the hotel up when Vlora blows up.
Yeah.
So we call the embassy. Great advice, stay indoors. We didn't need that advice. So we made arrangements to go to Greece. But Marisha had closed the borders because everyone was trying to leave. So it was getting a little tricky. So we left. Korçë was quiet for a week. And we couldn't get flights out of Greece, so we were stuck in Greece for a week and 10 days. Then Korçë blows up. So Nico, his father, says to him, listen, my friend and I, old people, we're going to die anyway. We'll protect the hotel. You go home with your family. He says, we're hunters. We have guns. So these 2 old guys sit in the hotel, and the gangs come. All these young punks. And Kicho was a big guy. And he says to them, looks them in the eye and says, okay, you guys decide which 2 are going to die. because we don't miss. We're hunters. So you're going to overwhelm us, but 2 are going to die. So you decide which ones. They look at these 2 crazy old men.
And they're like, I'm out of here.
I'm out of here. The next day, we had 5 guys with machine guns protecting the property. So
Wow.
if it wasn't for these 2 old men, the place would have been ransacked.
Wow. Interesting.
And a few years before that, another relative comes and says the clothing factory's being privatized.
That's right. You had a textile company there too.
And he said, Bangush Korçë, the director, is related to this guy, and they're willing to sell so much of it. So I said, Al, we're sending food boxes over every month. It's a lot of work. Here, 300 people will have jobs.
Yeah.
So let's consider it charity, not an investment. So we had Mitch Thomas, my brother, and I. We put the money in to buy basically half of the factory. Should have been more, but we were trying to be nice to the Albanian guy who put it together. And so we kept 300 people working. It turned out it was a good investment with a lousy Albanian manager.
Yeah.
He was the problem, not the business. So we kept it running and supporting it through the years. And it kept the people working. And in 97, when the crisis happened, there was no police, there was no military, there was nothing. So Bangush pays a guy, military guy, to bring a tank and put it in front of the doorway of the factory. I said, Bangush, if the guy shoots off the tank, he's going to blow up half the factory. He says, it's a show of strength.
Yeah.
So then they got guys with machine guns surrounding it, but it was a difficult time because people being kidnapped.
Yeah.
The kids were being kidnapped. So he ended up moving to Florida, right over the border with his family. He stayed to run the factory, but the family was safe.
Is the factory still open or closed down?
No, it's still open. There was some loans, and I told this guy, the bank is going to come close it up one day with the key. No. Kemi Chikpara, to yaping kata pesa. I said, that's not enough. You got to pay him every month. It's 12 months. No, we're going to give him a little money. And sure enough, they foreclose. So I called a friend of mine who's big in real estate. And I said, here's a chance for you to get an investment out of real estate. Very cheap. He knew the bankers. He knew that. So within 2 weeks, we made a deal that he would take over the factory. And the young guy that drove me here is Nico's son. And I recommended him to run the factory. So he runs the factory. There's about 100 people there now. But it still is a good business because Albania is still a low-cost supplier for the area when you compare it to Romania, Bulgaria, even Macedonia. So the key is to get reliable clients. And if your quality is up to snuff, then for them it's a low-cost supplier. They moved everything to China. But the problem they found is if you do fashion stuff and you put it in the stores in August, in September something is moving you didn't know and you needed stuff to put in the stores in 3 or 4 weeks, you couldn't get it from China.
Right.
So
it takes a couple of months.
They would take 20 or 30% of the business, leave it in Europe, and part of that was Albania. So we could turn things around in weeks. And the truck in 3 days was in Germany. So that's why they were still doing some work in Albania, because they found the transportation costs and the logistics time was difficult. Then things started blowing up in China. And they started moving stuff to Bangladesh, Vietnam, and all these other places. Yeah. But they always kept a European.
No, I mean, Albania has a good, I would say, a strong exposure in that field in clothing now. There's a lot of factories throughout Albania that do a lot of that work.
Yeah,
and in Kosovo as well. There's a lot of factories.
Yeah,
too.
we did the uniforms for the Kosovan army.
Oh,
that was
nice.
one of the side deals that happened. All the Kosovars saying, "You have the factory. We want to give you the business." I said, "Okay, give us the models. Tell us what." And we made a deal, so we did the first, 3,000 uniforms.
I was actually looking for, because I wanted to get production out of Albania for my clothing brand as well too over there. So
I think we're gonna have a meeting after this.
Yeah, I think we can talk. But Just want to get your advice on investing in Albania, right? Do you recommend that now or after? So you've been investing there for a few years now.
Albania's changed dramatically the last 10 years. 20 years ago, I understood why young people said, I want to leave.
Right.
There was very little opportunity. The education system was collapsing. Now, Albania has become a European city. Everything works. What amazed me on this last trip is you start crossing the street, all the cars stop. Before they wouldn't stop for red lights.
We got educated, you mean?
Well, I think they put some heavy fines if you don't let this pedestrian walk. And it's mind-boggling.
And they're finally moving to the right when the ambulance comes. Oh, that was one of my hugest
and the police, and they move. And it's really changed dramatically in 10 years.
Yes,
I have to say that. And I tell people, young people, I say, why do you want to leave? Well, it's opportunity.
We say that all the time. Yeah. Why are you leaving?
Yeah, it's opportunity. I said, you have a quality of life here you will not have anywhere in Europe and America. Okay?
That's very true.
You have to make your own way business-wise. And there's limited opportunities, but you can have a good salary. And if you're smart and you want to invest in something, you can do that. There are some opportunities. But it's a state of mind. It's a state of mind with everyone, and especially people outside Tirana. Because like in Korçë, you're going to have old people and young people, and the middle class is, this fella, Tony, he says, I had 8 good friends, okay? 2 are left in Albania. Some in Germany, some in America, some in Britain. And, they talk to each other. And it's a state of mind that I have to do something. And I really honestly believe that there are opportunities in Albania now, and the quality of life is so much better than you have here. You don't have to travel great distances.
Yeah,
right.
You have friends and family. You have the beach areas not too far away. But trying to convince young people is very, very difficult.
I think it has to do with curiosity, right? I think that people are curious to see what's outside Albania and for them to experience for themselves, right? And then once they do see that, they see the lifestyle that, especially in America that we know here, right? I'm looking to go back because I feel like that's the lifestyle that I want to be in, and not this one where you're constantly hustling and working and,
Yeah.
But I do want to ask you a little bit also about education, because you also involved in the Albanian education system there. You were a board member of the Albanian American American University in Tirana, right?
Yeah. What the history of that is, I worked with an ex-ambassador to write a business plan to create a university in Albania, and he had worked on one in I don't know, I think Azerbaijan, somewhere else. So he had the blueprint. So with that document, I was talking to USAID people and some people over there. Meantime, Berisha got involved and made for-profit universities. That killed the education system because, there were some good schools, but once you make it for-profit, some corruption comes in. So there were only several good schools left. So the poor young people were stuck in a system that was very limited. So I said, if we can create an American university there, and over the years we talked to several. One wanted to go to Korçë, most of them wanted to be in Tirana. The problem was getting a quality university.
Yeah.
There were always smaller universities that were ready to do something. And about 6-7 years ago, there was an Albanian American there, Phil Giantris. Both daughters had worked in the U.S. Embassy over there. They were all fluent in Albanian. And he decided to open up a water consulting business. And he basically organized all the water systems throughout Albania. But his main business was outside the country. These are World Bank projects that were funded. And he was on the board of the Harry Full School. And if you have an opportunity to go to Albania, you should visit that school. It started in 1922 by some Red Cross volunteers. And they have a little museum there that's kind of interesting. It gives you the whole history. And it's a jewel in the middle of Tirana, and they were able to get back all the properties. And I was wondering, why didn't the communists close this down? Well, they understood it was a good institution, so they renamed it November 29th, Independence Day for Russia. This was
Oh my God.
1950 something. So they kept the school open and produced engineers and stayed as a vocational and technical school. Then 1990 came, and Harry Fultz's daughter was in Virginia, and she came back to Albania, and Dr. Agim Leka was very interested in doing something. So they got a Soros Foundation to change the windows and start fixing up. And his son, Donald Leka, got involved in the project. So for 4 or 5 years, they renovated some of the school and reopened it up. And you fast forward now, they've got 1,100 students. They graduate about 275 students. Half of them get scholarships abroad.
Very nice.
And the other half are stuck in the Albanian system that's very limited. So one day I'm talking to Phil, and he introduces me to Mondi Leka, who has a lot of investments in Albania, but they own Union Bank, among others. And Phil says, you two guys put your heads together because he wants to open up a university. You want to open up a university. Figure it out. Phil was that type of guy. Make it happen. So I started working with Mondi, and I said, this is the infrastructure that you think you need. And he says, we're ready to donate part of the campus for the university to start. And that was the beginning of it. And then we got introduced to people at RIT, AUK, American University of Kosovo. And they saw that there was a market in Tirana, much bigger than Kosovo. And so they agreed to become the American partner. And the kids will graduate with an American degree from RIT. And so to differentiate from AUK, this will be a STEM university, science, technology, engineering, and management. And the first 2 majors will be IT and electrical engineering.
Okay.
And the first class will start in August, September next year with 150 students.
Very nice.
So the final approval of the Albanian government hopefully will come this week, next week, and then they can open everything up. They're afraid to let people know about everything until things.
And are the professors from here or from there?
The professors were all selected by RIT. Doesn't matter where they're from. They have to have certain qualifications.
Okay.
And they run the education part of it. And if you're going to get a degree from them, the courses defined by them, the professors are defined by them. And there's another aspect of this, which is people probably have heard of the Albanian American Enterprise Fund. When communism collapsed in 1990, Congress decided they would support capitalism in all the countries that were coming out of communism. And Albania was eligible for $30 million. Now, 1991, 92, $30 million in Albania went a long
It's
way,
a lot of money.
but no one knew anything about business.
Right.
So it was difficult to get started. So it took about 7, 8, 9 years till they found business people that understood business plans. And then there was a group headed by a Wall Street guy, Michael Granoff, that was on the board. And he decided to make bigger investments. So there was an Italian guy, Dominic Scaglione, who was a Citibank banker, retired. And he always wanted to start a bank in Albania. And they would always say, oh, it's a lot of money, too much competition. So they finally agreed to open up the American Bank of Albania. Now you put the word American and bank together, everyone trusts them. So they moved a lot of money over there, and they had a retired banker, Ron Carey, running it. Very successful. And they sold it for an Italian bank for about $120 million or something. So fast forward, this fund is probably the most successful of all the funds, return on investment. And the rules were simple from the U.S. government. You give us back our money, the rest of the money must stay in the foundation of the country. It cannot be taken out of the country, and you have to do whatever efforts, investments, projects in Albania. So that foundation is very well endowed, and we've been talking to them, providing some scholarships for the university, and everything is moving along in a good plane. And they have 2 Albanian directors that you have to work through and provide to them, and then they recommend to the board. So we're optimistic they're going to become our partners in this, in a way, and fund some of the projects. So right now the university has taken, there's like 2 amphitheaters, small areas with 1-story buildings. That will be the classrooms, the cafeteria, the student center. These were shops that were converted. And they had a 30-room junior college, which they're going to close down, and that's where the university will start. There's 30 classrooms there. And then we're going to have to build some buildings. They have some extra land.
So, Lou, I want to bring it back here a little bit and talk about the community here. So I know you're one of the founders of the Albanian American
National Albanian Council.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that, how that initiative started, and why did you get involved with the community?
Well, I've always been involved more with the Orthodox community because that's what I knew.
Right.
And then we heard about this, and there were Albanians from Macedonia, Kosovo, Albanian, and I had not met some of these people before. And some of these were accomplished people, and it was driven more by the Kosovars that had a need.
Right.
Because Albania was independent at that point. Not that Albania didn't have needs, but the Albanians thought they knew everything. They didn't have needs, but that wasn't so. So we got together a few meetings. I met Safo Boga, had a conference room from one of the banks he worked in. That's where we met. And Karen Bada that came from Detroit. The Rusi family, Ilir was representing them. And Harry was there, and a bunch of other people that had a degree of success. And there was a congressman, there was a fellow that worked for a congressman, Elliot Engel at that point. And he said, you need a lobbying group in Washington. If you're going to get anywhere, if you want to help, that's how things are done in America. So we created this council, hired someone from Washington, Albanian American, Ilir Zherka at that point, who knew the land in Washington. And we decided we'd put some money together and open up an office there and start soliciting other business people. And that's how NAC started. It was really on a shoestring. And then as we realized the need was really big, and then we had to have fundraisers for politicians, the usual stuff. Right. Do. And then we opened up an office in Washington. Aphrodita Rakipi was the first young lady there, and she was kind of coordinating things until we hired someone full-time, because it was not a cheap proposition. Dr. Samira Pishti was kind of one of our leaders. He was one of the intellectual guys that knew about Albania and was willing to help, but he didn't have the business background. So that's how it started, and it grew. And then we'd have a Congress Day every year. We'd bring over 100 Albanian Americans there to visit with their congressmen and senators. And we had a footprint that was much larger than we really were because of this. And, image counts a lot. So then things were getting hot with Serbia and Milosevic, and we were having meetings with the ambassadors, and the Serbs really were not organized at that point. And they were flabbergasted how this small group had this presence, and they didn't. And then the focal point became Washington and the annual fundraising event we had in New York. And we'd have the NAC dinner, which started with 300. We had up to 700 people when Bill Clinton was our honoree. And it became one of the big social events for the community and a big fundraiser for us. So, that became something that people were willing to pay money for, to be seen there.
Right.
And then we had interesting people. Mitch McConnell was one of our honorees. Baker, the first Secretary of State, went to Albania. And I remember we picked him up from his private plane, Teterboro, brought him to the plaza. It was costing a fortune for this guy to come. But so we had lunch with him. And I was asking him how it was in Albania the first time he went there. And he said, there's a square full of 100,000 people. And the Secret Service came back to me and said, you cannot go out there. We cannot protect you. It's as simple as that. You can do a radio broadcast. He was a big Texan. He says, hell, these people have been waiting 45 years. I'm going out there, and you protect the perimeter, do what you have to do, but I'm going out there. So he did. And he gave a speech, and the Albanian people still remember that day like it was yesterday. And he said, these people deserve an American to come out there that represents the country. And it's one of the highlights of that period. And people just were all over the place. And he was appreciative of the Albanian people, understood that they loved America.
Lou, I do want to talk a little bit about the Albanian government and their involvement with the diaspora. Do you think that the Albanian government is doing enough to involve the diaspora in meaningful ways? Because
it's a tough question, because when you have a nice club, it's difficult to invite other people into this club. And therefore, lip service is easy, but to really encourage people, I'll give you an example. I'm not going to mention names, but someone bought some property north of Durrës, and they wanted to put a small resort, 50 rooms. It was going to be a family investment. They had the money. So I'm at a golf outing, and this fellow pulls me aside and says, listen, we're getting nowhere. I don't understand what's going on. I said, do you have an Albanian partner? He says, no, we're going to do it from here. I said, you'll never get it done. Why? I said, because the system there says you need an Albanian partner.
You need a muscle guy.
You need a muscle guy, and you need a guy that knows the right people, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So they never did it. And this was one of the tragedies of trying to bring American investors over there. And I was involved with the guys that were going to buy the oil wells from next to Bankers Petroleum. They had all the paperwork. They had everything. They wanted to do things. One bottleneck after another. And then through the back door, some of Leometta's friends got involved, and they changed the paperwork. So it was not easy trying to do business there. And I would discuss this with the embassy, and they said, we're ready to help anyone, but when they come here and they understand the climate, they say, is it worth it for a small country to make an investment? And I think that's been the biggest hurdle to getting American investment there. And there was a lot of Albanian Americans that were willing to do things in the 90s. But once they understood that they have to do things different ways, they backed off.
Right.
And part of the fundraising for the university is approaching these people that really wanted to help Albania but didn't know how to do it. They understand education. So I'm trying to get donations from that group. But for just Albanian Americans born in this country to go back and invest there was not easy. And no matter what the government said, there were too many hurdles to overcome.
that makes sense.
So so just to stay on that topic specifically, do you encourage Albanian Americans to go there now, today, in Albania to invest, or do you kind of tell them to be careful and there's going to be some challenges?
Find a
doing
partner.
that?
Well, I don't encourage them saying go by yourself. I think you still need an Albanian partner.
Okay.
You need someone on the ground that can make some things happen, manage whether it's real estate or, we had someone that wanted to do a call center. And for an Italian company. And a lot of Albanians speak Italian and English. And it was between the Croatian location or Tirana. And interesting enough, there was an infrastructure. There was some fiber optic cables that had been put between Albania and Italy, so they didn't have to build it. So it would employ about 300 people. Last minute, some hurdles, they went to Croatia.
Yeah.
So sad.
Yeah, and this was
great for Croatia, but
a good paying
for
job
us.
for young people. In those days, they get €500-600 a month. So bigger projects were tough to do, and I would always encourage someone to have an Albanian partner because they understand the landscape, they understand the ministries, who you have to see, how you approach them about different permits and licenses you need. We're not used to doing that here. We used to doing business. You go in, you go to the privately, and you get whatever license you need and move on.
And in terms of the community here, I know we touched up on a little bit. Do you think that, so NAC is no longer there?
No.
Do we still need a lobby today?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the problem was there was a mission with Kosovo. We were at a Congress day, and I remember we went to Union Station. Dino Rebelli was there, Harry Bekhtari, Leah Russi, some of us just to have lunch. And we're watching TV, and the bombing started in Kosovo. And I looked at Harry, and he said, I dreamt about this for 20 years, but I never thought it would happen. Never did I think it would actually happen. And some of the need disappeared. But there's a lot of money buried in the U.S. government. I tell this to the Albanian ambassadors in Washington we meet with periodically. I said, you have to know where the money is buried and where the equipment for the Albanian military is, and you can get a lot of stuff donated. And, when they were trying to get into NATO, it was more important that you have some of these contacts. But I think it's still very important because Albania is still a small country. There's still some people trying to impinge on it and take things from them. And there's still a problem with Albanian minorities in the different areas in the Balkan. So I think there's still a need for a lobby group. But some Albanian Americans that have done well have to step up because it doesn't happen without an office. You've got to be willing to fund $500,000 a year probably to have that. And it's important. I think it's still as important as ever, especially because the State Department stays pretty static, but the administrations change. And people have to see you and know you.
Right.
And,
I agree. I want to have another last question because we're running out of time. But what do you make of Albania right now is trying to bid to get into the EU? What is your take on that? Do you think Albania should actually join the EU
or do you
stay
feel
out?
us going into the EU we may lose some of our identity?
No, I think if you look at the other countries in Poland, you don't lose your identity if you want to keep it. But it has a lot of benefits for Albania. The no duties between places, people willing to travel. It makes it an easier place to do business for European countries. The currencies are the same. Transportation, you'll get access to a lot of things.
But you don't see a challenge economically wise for us to be competing with some of these countries who have a much stronger economies and structures in place?
Yes and no, because they also need lower labor rate areas to invest in.
Right.
So it's a two-way street. And I think you'd see much more investments on the coast. I know there's a Spanish company that's looking at building 4 hotels, 400 or 500 people. They've got one already. packed July and August. It's open 6 months now. They want to build 4 more. Financing is an issue right now. But they've picked out the locations. And, this is the same water as the Greeks have, as the Croatians have. It's a beautiful area. Right now, the infrastructure is not there. So it needs investments. They're talking about a train from Kosovo to Durrës.
That'll be a nice project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's $1 or $2 billion. You need European money for that.
Right.
So it's projects like that for some of the infrastructure development. You need some help from the people that have the money. So it's I think it's a good thing. EU's not stupid. They know what's happening in Albania.
Yeah.
Yes, they do.
They're really turning the screws and saying, when you straighten some of these problems out, this is the criteria. It's very clear cut, and that's where we're at.
And I want to wrap it up, but I want to ask you, what's some of your advice for young people in the community here, whether it's to us to work better together, or do we do advice to how do we link that bridge between the community here and back home?
I think this project, the Birthright,
The German
Original.
yeah.
bringing some kids back, I think is a great idea. I was talking to a fellow from the Church of Albania that was here, and they have a summer camp for 1,000 kids. They'd love to have 10 or 20 or 30 come from the States. So I think there are youth programs that have to be set up like that to introduce some of the people to their heritage. Someone that's first generation hears it from his parents, but it's a different thing when you go there and live it.
Yeah.
Right.
Even for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So
how they do schooling abroad for 6 months, how they do.
Right. And I wouldn't be surprised if the school that we're opening in Toronto will have some students from America.
Yes. We should have an exchange program. Yeah.
And there's 2 types. One is a semester abroad.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the other, because it's all in English, will be if you want to get a 4-year degree. So I think over time, you'll have 5-10% of the students that may be from the States that say, I've always wanted to do this. It's 4 years, but so I think trying to get people involved in these exchange programs is probably the best thing as a starting point to open people's eyes. And then there's got to be the media, and whether it's Instagram or Facebook or TikTok,
what we're doing.
You people see something and are willing to think about making a change or spending a few weeks somewhere. And, Albania is not the hardship it was 20 years ago.
No, it isn't.
I mean, it's a modern country, so you're not going to give up anything from the nice things in life.
I feel like it's better there than here.
And in some ways it is.
Yes.
In some ways it is. And so I would encourage people to look at exchange things, even within families, if you can get your kids to go there for a month.
Yeah.
Listen, the Greeks did this for 50, 60 years. The kids would go with the grandparents and spend 2 months in Greece. And now, even in our little church, people disappear. Where was I? I was in Korçë for 6 weeks. I took my kids there. I said, really? So it's happening in its organic way, but it's something that should be encouraged. I think, I was embarrassed to be Albanian when I was young because I was called albino. I was called everything under the sun. And I spoke Greek, so it was easier for me to say I'm Greek because I didn't have to go through 2 hours of explanation.
Yeah.
And when things opened up, and of course, Albania, we were home, we're Albanian, all the relatives, we'd have everything. But when you're a kid, it's very difficult to stand out, and you have to have the strength of your convictions. Now it's a lot easier because there's clubs for young people. They have networks of
non-Albanians.
Now we're very proud to say we're Albanian.
And non-Albanians want to be Albanian now.
Yeah.
You got to make honorary Albanians.
Yes.
May cost them, but we'll get
Thank you so much, Lou.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk to you
My
about
pleasure.
your past and your present.
And the
think
future.
You have a wealth of knowledge, and it's glad to talk to you. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity to tell everyone there will be an American university. So
Looking
Yes.
forward to it.
We're going to definitely let us know more about that. We're
I
going to
will.
talk about that in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you.